If you are convinced that you are living your purpose while simultaneously present to a feeling of emptiness, regret, wasted time, lost love, then this video is for you. I'm very familiar with both of those states, and being in that position, it doesn't feel good. It sucks. I'm gonna walk you through the very specific tools, the very specific psychological concepts that I use to get out of that position, elaborate on the position that I'm in now, which I think is infinitely better. So in order to understand this concept of purpose, I think it's important for us to sort of backtrack a little bit and I want to look at these 4 stages of consciousness, okay? So in order to understand this idea of purpose, I want to walk us through the 4 stages of consciousness. Now, before I get into this, I want to offer a little bit of a disclaimer. I know that, some of the language that I'm going to be using here, it can trigger a sense of new age, woo-woo spiritualism for some folks. And I know that turns off a lot of people, rightfully so. And I want to let you know that as somebody with a master's in psychology, that is not who I am. That is not my work. My goal is to take some of these spiritual ideas and really ground them in some psychology and really bridge the gap between, mysticism and science, between spirituality and psychology. So go ahead and stick with me. I'm going to walk you through this process of purpose and make sure that you stay all the way until the end of the video, because I am going to share with you how specifically your insecurities help you find your purpose. Okay, we have 4 stages of consciousness that are available to us here. I mean, things are very nuanced. Obviously, this isn't gospel. It's very dynamic. The veil between them are very thin, but for the sake of simplicity, I think that this framework is extremely beneficial. Remember that the process of growth is growing within these 4 stages of consciousness. So in victim consciousness, one is living aimlessly. They are at the mercy of life's external forces. They are convinced that life is happening to them, and they may not have this inner sense of empowerment to, quote, happen to life. This is, these folks are what a lot of people online would refer to as NPCs, or non-player characters, which I personally think is an extremely derogatory term. I hate it. I won't ever use it again because I don't think it's inclusive of the systemic and systematic issues that we have present today that keep people binded in this level of consciousness. So again, I use that term just to give you an idea of what I'm trying to describe here, but I hate the term. I think it's incredibly derogatory. So my hope is that those that are impacted by this level of consciousness that can realize that these stages aren't a death sentence. One can climb within and through these stages of consciousness with the right tools. And my hope is to provide those tools for you today. So that is victim consciousness. And that brings us to our next stage of consciousness, which is ego consciousness. When I use the word ego, I don't mean it in the sense that, hey, this person has a big ego. Hey, this guy's cocky, he's arrogant. I think 1 or 2 people have said that about me at some point in my life, but that's okay. We live in acceptance. What I mean by ego is I mean it in the psychological sense. So our ego is our sense of identity. Our ego is our sense of separation between ourselves and the external world. We use it to navigate through life. Is very important, but it can also be destructive. I think that people operating in egoic levels of consciousness is the result of a lot of violence and conflict in the world, but it's not always destructive, okay? So what's important to recognize about this level of consciousness, this stage of consciousness, is that here people are using everything outside themselves as a means to an end. And the end is the gratification of their own ego. So they use people, places, and things to gratify their ego. Their ego is wrapped up in these self-involved values, okay? And what are these self-involved values? Well, power, greed, envy, lust, fear, validation, selfishness. In some ways, I think that these all can sort of be wrapped up and fall under the umbrella of the 7 deadly sins. But again, it's just important to remember that at this stage, people are wrapped up in these self-involved, egoic driven values, and they are using everything outside of themselves as a means to gratify their own ego. The process of moving out of this stage of consciousness is the process of turning your ego into an observer, but that's a topic for another video. Okay, so this third stage of consciousness is really where the rubber meets the road. And this stage of consciousness is initiation consciousness. So at this stage, people have transcended beyond the need to gratify their own ego all of the time, and they want to do good. They want to provide some value to the community, to their loved ones, their family, etc. They are looking and seeking for ways to be of service, to contribute in this game, in this thing that we call life, which is obviously a very beneficial thing, but there is a trap at this stage of initiation consciousness, and that is where I want to bring back in this idea of purpose. At this stage of initiation consciousness, people are being pushed by purpose. And what I mean by pushed is that they are pushing towards this idea or this need to find their purpose. That's a very silly premise, this idea that one needs to find their purpose. I think that, the fallacy in that is that inherently, if you're always trying to find something, it means you don't have it. If you're always looking or pursuing something, then inherently you're coming from a place of lack of that thing. And also, it is the stress of needing to find your purpose. It is the stress of needing to find what you're supposed to do in this life that brings you back down to these lower levels of consciousness. Because if on a daily basis, I'm stressing about my purpose, finding my purpose, not being clear or sure what it is, it's really easy for me to feel like a victim when I don't have it yet, right? It's really easy for me to get wrapped up in anger and frustration and maybe some of these greater egoic values that keep me binded in these lower states of being and feeling. So this is why I think that there are a lot of people who are really self-aware yet stuck. This idea of needing to find your purpose inherently has a trap in it. It can be extremely self-defeating, stressful. So if this is you, I want to tell you that you can go ahead and stop stressing now. Relax, unclench your jaw, drop your shoulders, maybe take a big belly breath, because there is a better alternative. And I'm going to walk you through that, okay? So we talked about this idea of pushing towards your purpose in the initiation stage of consciousness. When you find yourself at this place, it's such a critical juncture, because you're either going to receive, full initiation into a collective conscious space, which is the fourth stage, or you're going to, because of the stress and the need to figure it all out, be pulled back down into these victim or egoic levels of consciousness. So this fourth stage of consciousness, which I just laid out, is collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is guided by universal love. I use the word guided very specifically because there is an intelligence that works within the guiding. And again, I want to sort of ground this. It's not all woo-woo, okay? So if you look at the history of civilization, you look at art, technology, mathematics, science, philosophy, all these different fields and mediums, it all builds on top of itself, right? We stand on the shoulders that have come before us, and these fields, they build on itself. Now, consciousness works the exact same way. If you look at our collective consciousness today, we are, generally speaking, more progressive, more tolerant, more open-minded, right? There is a mechanism at play in which consciousness builds on itself, and it looks like it's traversing towards something. There is an evolutionary process to our consciousness, a direction in which it is being guided by this universal love. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know what the direction is, that I know where things are headed. I'm not a cult leader. I know I may look like one a little bit, but I'm not. And in fact, I would much rather live the mystery and live the question than actually know the answer. Okay, so now that I've laid the framework of what we're working with here, I want to talk about how you can put yourself in a position for your purpose to find you, where you are being pulled by your purpose, pulled by this universal love, by this collective consciousness, and no longer pushing towards your purpose, which again is very stressful. So to really understand how this process works, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, tell you a little bit about my story, and share with you how I went through this process. So my name is Brian Meyerhofer. I am an associate marriage family therapist, and I'm a men's coach. I help men claim their fire, draw their sword, and get back in the arena of life. And I'm going to tell you a little story, okay? So I'm going to be using a very silly metaphor here. Please bear with me because I'm going to wrap it all up and tie it all together. So I'm obsessed with basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan. And, at one point I found myself in moments of stress and boredom. I was consistently revisiting these same basketball highlights of like my team's greatest victories, of these big wins. And as somebody with a master's in psychology, I was really curious about this behavior because I recognize that, our behaviors all serve a function. It's important not to see things through the lens of like good and bad, but try and understand the function of our behavior. It's there for a reason. So it was at this point that, that I realized that this behavior, this need to revisit old victories was serving as a metaphor for my life. In a lot of ways, I was actually doing the same thing in my life. So what I uncovered was that I was riding high off of past victories because, just to provide a little bit of context, what I was doing at the time was I thought that I was living my dream. I thought that I was living my purpose, that I had, quote, found my purpose, that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. So in my early and mid 20s, I was an actor, and that was always my biggest dream. I wanted to, see myself on the silver screen. I wanted to work opposite A-listers and tell stories of humanity. And I did that. I was very fortunate that I co-starred in some of the biggest television shows in history. I worked opposite an A-list comedy actor. I was in commercials for some of the biggest brands in the world. I wrote, produced, directed my own films. I felt like I was really living my purpose, which was to share my art and entertain people through art and my expression and tell stories of humanity. I was struggling with this sense of emptiness, meaninglessness, this stuckness. I was experiencing these symptoms, which I've now identified as symptoms that sit within this initiation stage of consciousness that can be disguised as something else. So the inspirational quality of my life at that time had sort of dried up. I was stuck in this like staleness, this monotony of life, and the things that I would normally do to give me a shift of perspective, like exercising, connecting with friends, meditating, reading, journaling, etc., they weren't giving me this shift in perspective. And in fact, a lot of the activities that I used to really enjoy and love, those had also dried up a little bit. I wasn't finding the same enjoyment. And I really had this restless whisper that was within me that was telling me that like I wasn't doing enough. This wasn't it. And I've experienced that voice at times in my life, but normally it's way louder. And I know how to deal with the loud voices in my life through exercise, meditation, again, some of the things that I just described. But this was what I like to call the restless whisper. And I've learned to identify that restless whisper is there for a reason, okay? And I was finally in this position where I was able to adhere to this restless whisper because I knew it was right. I was not in the position where I thought I was in reference to my purpose. So to bring this back to the silly basketball metaphor, I realized that yes, I was like living these great victories, but what I wasn't doing, I was not revisiting my biggest losses, my biggest fears, my insecurities, my weaknesses, the things about myself that I hated. I was not living through those. It was through exploration of those, through bringing love, awareness, curiosity to those that I found more wholeness in my inner sense of self. And I began to grow out of that initiation stage of consciousness and I was able to just touch. I'm not saying I live there all the time, but I was able to touch and really experience what it felt like. And so through that, I was able to grow through these stages of consciousness. And I got a taste of what it felt like to be in collective consciousness. I got a taste of what it felt like to be pulled by my purpose instead of pushing towards my mission. And let me tell you, being pulled by your purpose is infinitely better. The feeling is infinitely better than the stress of feeling like you're pushing towards your purpose. Okay, so back to the actionable steps. I want to ground this in some specific psychology so that you can, take these tools, run with them, and hopefully cross the threshold and get a taste of what it feels like to be pulled by your purpose instead of pushing towards your purpose. If you know me or you listen to me, you know that I talk about Carl Jung all the time. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist. He was an Einstein of the mind. He's a widely controversial yet respected figure in psychology. One of his big theories was the theory of personality. I'm going to break that down a little bit, but his work in this department around personality is the basis for many of our psychological tests and assessments today, like the Myers-Briggs personality test, for example. A cornerstone of his philosophy is actually very similar to these 4 stages of consciousness. So he sought to bring his clients through a very similar process. Again, these 4 stages are victim, ego, initiation, and collective consciousness. So a big piece of Jung's work was this idea that we need to develop the parts of ourselves that are inferior. So Jung coined the terms extroversion and introversion. I think we're all familiar with those terms of what those mean. And in Jung's theory, he believed that most of us are dominated by one of these functions. I know the psychology and the conversation around it has sort of shifted a little bit. People can be an extroverted introvert or whatever, but for the sake of simplicity, I think it's really helpful to sort of adopt this concept here. And so, for example, I am a highly extroverted person. I'm dominated by my extroverted side. So in order for me to heal and to grow more, I've needed to develop the introverted part of me that lives within inside, because we all have both within us. We're just dominated by one or the other, okay? So I need to develop my solitude and my introversion in order to find this greater wholeness, because once you find this greater wholeness, you move up within these stages of consciousness. So another part of his theory of personality is this idea that we have, and so the 4 are thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And again, Jung believed that we are dominated by one of these functions. A second one is our auxiliary function. It's like the little brother or little sister to the main one. And then the other 2 are inferior functions. So again, I work with a lot of men in my life coaching practice and in my therapy practice. And generally speaking, most male identifying individuals, not all the time, but generally speaking, are dominated by their thinking function, and their feeling function is inferior. It's not developed. So if this is you, I would suggest starting with developing your feeling function, because it provides the highest return on value, in my opinion. So yeah, Jung believed that everyone has these 4 functions inside of us. And in order for us to find more wholeness, which, wholeness is synonymous for growth, moving within these stages, then we need to develop the parts of ourselves that we deem as less than. We need to develop the parts of ourselves that are inferior. So if you're an introvert, develop your extroverted side. If you are dominated by your feeling function, develop your thinking function. Seek wholeness in developing all these different parts of ourselves, because we have these different aspects of our personality, and it is in integrating all of them and bringing them all to fruition that we heal. So just as I had realized with my silly basketball metaphor, I needed to develop the parts of myself that I thought were less than. I needed to develop my insecurities, my fears, my weaknesses. I really needed to take a look at my struggles, my losses, the things about myself that I thought were my weak points, the things about myself that I thought that I didn't like. Because the process of expanding our consciousness through victim, ego, and initiation into collective consciousness is the process of integrating all aspects of our personality. Because the goal is wholeness, to become a well-rounded person. The more wholeness you feel, the better you feel, and the better you are able to be pulled by purpose and really contribute to your loved ones, to your community, to your family. So I want to share again, bring it back to a little bit of my story here. Here's an example of how this showed up in my life, okay? So when I was in my late teens, early mid-20s, I was really insecure about my manhood. I was really insecure about my sense of masculinity. I think this is because I'm somebody who has a really highly developed, naturally had a high feeling function. And there's a massive cultural narrative, which is really such a shame, that men don't feel their feelings, that if you are an emotional man, then somehow you're less of a man. And I had really digested, this narrative and this messaging that I was receiving from culture and other men around me. And it was a massive insecurity for me. It was a massive wound. And as a result of that wound, I think that I compensated for that by really digging into the topics of masculinity and manhood and what it looks like, etc. And I spent a lot of time reading a lot of psychology, a lot of depth psychology from some of these really famous thinkers in the field of men's health, that I was able to really develop this insecurity. And just to provide some context of where I'm at now, I no longer question my sense of manhood, my sense of masculinity. But B, what has happened is that what was my biggest insecurity, which was this like absence of masculinity, is now my greatest gift. I am a leader of men today. I own a recovery home. I'm here now where I house 13 men that are recovering from drug addiction. I am a coach and a therapist. The specific demographic that I work with is with men. And, this wounding that I had around my masculinity, it ended up being my greatest gift. And this is the truth. This is the truth. Our wounds and our gifts are connected. This is why it is so difficult to own your gift, because in order to own your gift, you've also got to own your wound. Our insecurities are our biggest messengers. They're there for a reason. Just like I was talking about with our behavior serves a function. It's there for a reason. Our fears, our insecurities, our wounds are there for a reason. They have value. See, our purpose and our insecurities are very connected. Our gift and our wound is very connected. In order to own your purpose, you must own your insecurities. In order to own your gift, you must own your wound. Our biggest insecurities are our biggest messengers. And in fact, they may be, like it was for me in my experience, your biggest gift. So if you are someone who feels stuck in life, stuck in finding your purpose, who constantly feel this need and this stress to, quote, find your purpose, you're pushing towards it and the stress is weighing you down, my hope is that instead of seeking to find your purpose, you seek to find greater healing. And it is through developing the parts of ourselves that are less than, that are inferior, less than, inferior. I hate to use this language of good and bad, but it is through that process that you heal. And once you heal, your consciousness begins to grow. Your awareness grows even more than where it was at previously. And as a result of that, you no longer feel the need to push towards your purpose, but instead you're being pulled by your purpose, which is guided by this universal love. And thank God, because literally thank God, because we need more people who are on their purpose. People are hurting, people are suffering, and I believe the world changes one human heart at a time. So if you are a man who, like me, was questioning or is questioning your manhood, your masculinity, I made a video about how to turn on your masculine fire, how to activate your masculinity. Go ahead and click the box above, check it out, like and subscribe, and I appreciate you supporting the journey. All right, bless.